The billionaire CEO slammed her hand against the glass display and pointed at the exhausted single dad standing beside his 6-year-old daughter. "Security, get him away from the car." The crowd erupted with laughter. 20 of the world's most expensive engineers had spent 3 days trying to start the abandoned supercar worth millions, and failed. Now a tired mechanic in worn-out clothes was claiming he knew what was wrong. "You," the CEO laughed. "My engineers have degrees you couldn't dream of." The little girl grabbed her father's hand. "Daddy can fix it." More laughter. Security stepped forward. Then the father quietly looked through the engine bay and stopped. His eyes locked onto a single wire hidden deep beneath the carbon frame. The smile vanished from his face. For the first time, he looked afraid. Then he whispered, "Whoever built this car was never supposed to be found." Silence swallowed the room. The laughter followed him from every direction as he stood beside the velvet barriers surrounding the abandoned supercar. Luxury executives in tailored suits exchanged amused looks. Influencers held up their phones, already recording what they believed would become another embarrassing moment for a man who clearly didn't belong among millionaires. The vehicle sat beneath brilliant showroom lights like a forgotten king. Its sleek carbon fiber body reflected the faces of the crowd gathering around it. For 3 days, the event had revolved around one challenge: start the supercar that 20 elite engineers had failed to revive. And now an exhausted mechanic wearing faded work clothes had somehow become the center of attention. The CEO crossed her arms and stared at him with open disbelief. "You still think you can do what my engineers couldn't?" The crowd chuckled. The father didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the car. Not the paint, not the wheels, not the polished exterior. He studied the machine itself. That silence somehow irritated the CEO even more. "Did you hear me?" she asked sharply. The man finally nodded. "I heard you. And I'd like to look closer." More laughter erupted. One engineer shook his head. Another smirked. A television reporter whispered to her cameraman, "This won't take long." Near the back of the crowd, the man's 6-year-old daughter squeezed through a gap and hurried to his side. She wrapped both hands around his arm. Her small face was filled with confidence. "My daddy fixes everything." Several people laughed harder. The little girl looked confused. She didn't understand why. To her, it was simply the truth. The father glanced down and offered a small smile. It was the first sign of emotion anyone had seen from him. The CEO noticed it. For a brief moment, something about that calm expression unsettled her. Most people became defensive when they were humiliated. Most people argued. Most people tried to prove themselves. This man did none of those things. He simply observed. The CEO stepped aside with a sarcastic gesture. "Fine. You have 5 minutes." The crowd immediately moved closer. Phones rose into the air. Everyone wanted a front row seat to the failure. The father slowly approached the supercar. His daughter followed beside him. The engine compartment remained partially exposed from the engineers' previous inspections. He leaned forward. The noise of the room faded. His eyes moved carefully across every visible component. A minute passed. Then another. Nobody understood what he was looking for. The engineers exchanged confident smiles. One checked his watch. Another folded his arms. Then something changed. The father's expression hardened. Very slightly. So slightly that most people missed it. But his daughter didn't. She knew her father's face. She had seen that look before. Usually right before he solved a problem nobody else could solve. He crouched lower beside the engine. His gaze stopped on a narrow section hidden beneath several layers of components. A place almost impossible to see without changing angles. His eyes narrowed. The crowd grew quieter. For the first time, he seemed interested. The CEO noticed the change immediately. "What is it?" she asked. No answer. The father reached toward the compartment but stopped halfway. His face suddenly lost all color. Not from fear, from recognition. He slowly stood. Every conversation in the room died. The engineers stared. The reporters lowered their microphones. Even the CEO felt a strange knot forming in her stomach. The father looked back at the car. Then at the hidden area inside the engine. Finally, he spoke. Not loudly. Just enough for everyone to hear. "That's impossible." A chill moved through the room. The CEO frowned. "What is?" The father didn't look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the machine. Because buried deep inside the abandoned supercar, He had just seen something that shouldn't have existed. Something he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. The silence hanging over the showroom felt heavier than the millions of dollars surrounding it. The father's eyes remained locked on the hidden section inside the engine bay. Nobody laughed anymore. The confidence that had filled the room only moments earlier was beginning to crack. The CEO stepped closer. "What did you find?" The father didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully leaned back into the compartment and moved a small bundle of cables aside. A metallic plate became visible. Tiny, almost invisible, covered by years of dust and grease. One of the engineers scoffed. "That's what stopped you. A serial plate." The father slowly wiped the surface clean with his thumb. The moment the engraved symbol appeared, his heartbeat seemed to stop. A circle, a line through the center. 3 tiny marks beneath it. His daughter tilted her head. "Daddy, what's that drawing?" The father swallowed. "It isn't a drawing." The CEO noticed the change in his voice. For the first time since he arrived, he sounded shaken. The crowd exchanged curious glances. One reporter zoomed her camera closer. "Then what is it?" she asked. The father stood and stared at the symbol. "It belongs to someone." The engineers looked confused. The CEO folded her arms. "Whose symbol?" The father looked toward the supercar. A memory was resurfacing. A workshop. Blueprints spread across a table. A brilliant inventor nobody could understand. A man obsessed with creating an engine that would change the future. A man who had disappeared decades ago. The father slowly shook his head. "No." One engineer laughed nervously. "Come on. You're acting like you've seen a ghost." The father ignored him. Because in a way, he had. The inventor's symbol was supposed to be impossible to find. Most people in the automotive world believed his work had vanished forever. The official story claimed every prototype had been destroyed. Every design erased. Every experiment abandoned. Yet the symbol was right there. Hidden inside a supercar nobody could start. The CEO's expression became serious. She had heard rumors before. Stories whispered at private industry events. Legends about a revolutionary engine that had disappeared before it could be completed. Stories she never believed. Until now. "You recognize it," she said quietly. The father nodded. The room became completely silent. One investor stepped forward. "Who built this car?" The father looked back at the engine. "That's the problem." "What problem?" He exhaled slowly. "The company records say this vehicle was designed 12 years ago." The CEO nodded. "That's correct." The father's eyes narrowed. "Then explain why it contains technology that wasn't publicly known until years later." The room froze. Several engineers exchanged worried looks. One immediately walked toward the engine compartment. Another pulled out a tablet and began checking technical specifications. The CEO's confidence was fading fast. "What are you saying?" The father pointed toward the hidden assembly. "That component doesn't belong here." One engineer frowned. "That's impossible." The father turned toward him. "No. What's impossible is how it got there." The daughter looked up at her father. "Did someone hide it?" The question seemed innocent, but it hit the room like a hammer. Because suddenly everyone was wondering the same thing. Who had hidden the component? And why? The father carefully reached deeper into the engine bay. His fingers disappeared beneath the carbon frame. A few seconds later, he pulled out something small. The crowd leaned forward. The object fit in the palm of his hand. A worn metal key. The CEO stared. The engineers stared. The reporters rushed closer. There was no key slot anywhere on the vehicle. No reason for a key to exist. Yet someone had hidden it inside the engine. The father turned it over. His eyes widened. The same mysterious symbol was engraved on both sides. And on the back, barely visible beneath years of grime, were 3 words that made his blood run cold. For the final ignition. Nobody spoke. The words engraved on the key seemed to drain the air from the showroom. For the final ignition. The reporters stopped talking. The engineers stopped arguing. Even the CEO's expression had changed. The arrogance that had defined her all day was being replaced by something she wasn't used to feeling. Uncertainty. The father stared at the key as memories continued surfacing. He had heard that phrase once before. Many years ago. Long before anyone in this room knew his name. Long before he became a struggling mechanic raising a daughter alone. Back when he spent his evenings studying engineering journals and experimental engine designs that most people considered impossible. One article had fascinated him more than any other. It featured a reclusive inventor who claimed future engines would no longer rely on traditional ignition systems. People mocked him. Companies rejected him. Investors abandoned him. Then he vanished. And so did his research. Most assumed he had failed. But standing in front of this abandoned supercar, the father was beginning to realize something terrifying. Maybe the inventor had succeeded. The crowd watched as he carefully examined the key. One of the engineers stepped forward. That doesn't prove anything. The father looked up. No. The engineer folded his arms. It's probably a promotional piece. Maybe a collector item. Several others nodded. They wanted an explanation that felt safe. Normal. Anything except the possibility that they had overlooked something historic. The father quietly walked back to the engine compartment. His daughter stayed close beside him. The little girl looked around at the nervous faces surrounding them. Daddy. He glanced down. Yes. Why did they all look scared now? The question landed harder than anyone expected. Because nobody could answer it. The father smiled softly and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Sometimes people get scared when something they believe turns out to be wrong. The CEO heard every word. And for the first time, she wondered whether that description applied to her. The father returned his attention to the engine. The hidden wire. Everything kept leading back to that wire. 20 engineers had ignored it. 20 engineers had assumed it served no purpose. Yet every unusual component seemed connected to it. He traced its path carefully through the engine bay. Several engineers moved closer. Now they weren't mocking him. Now they were learning from him. The difference was impossible to miss. The father followed the wire beneath a protective panel. Then beneath another. And another. Each discovery revealed a system more complex than anyone expected. The CEO's face grew paler. This shouldn't exist, one engineer whispered. Another nodded. It's not in the blueprints. A third checked the official schematics again. Nothing matched. The hidden system had never been documented. Someone had deliberately concealed it. The father finally reached the end of the wire. His hand froze. The room waited. Every camera pointed toward him. Every eye followed his movements. Slowly, he removed a small carbon fiber cover. A hidden compartment appeared underneath. Gasps echoed through the showroom. Inside sat a mechanism unlike anything the engineers had ever seen. Compact, elegant, advanced, and at its center was a slot. A key slot, the same size and shape as the mysterious key in his hand. The CEO stared in disbelief. The engineers looked stunned. The reporters rushed forward. The daughter squeezed her father's hand. What does it do? The father didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the mechanism. Because he finally understood what he was looking at. This wasn't a backup system. It wasn't a repair feature. It wasn't even part of the original design. It was the true ignition system. The real heart of the abandoned supercar. The system nobody had ever discovered. The father slowly raised the key. The room held its breath. Then he looked directly at the CEO. His voice was calm, but the words hit like an explosion. If I'm right, this car was never broken. The silence that followed felt endless. Then he positioned the key above the hidden slot. And every person in the room realized the next few seconds might change everything they thought they knew. The father held the key above the hidden slot while dozens of phones recorded every movement. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The luxury showroom had become completely silent. The CEO stood frozen beside the supercar. Her investors, engineers, and executives watched from behind her, all waiting for the same answer. Was this exhausted mechanic about to embarrass himself? Or was something far bigger about to happen? The father looked down at his daughter. She squeezed his hand and smiled. Unlike everyone else in the room, she wasn't nervous. She never doubted him. Be careful, Daddy. He nodded. Then he inserted the key. A soft metallic click echoed through the engine compartment. Nothing happened. Several people exchanged looks. One engineer smirked. Another began shaking his head. The CEO's confidence started returning. Maybe this really was nonsense. Maybe they had all been caught up in a fantasy. Then a faint sound emerged from somewhere deep inside the vehicle. Tick, tick, tick. The father's eyes narrowed. The sound wasn't mechanical. It sounded deliberate, like a sequence beginning. The hidden compartment suddenly illuminated with a soft glow. Gasps spread through the crowd. Several engineers rushed forward. What is that? I've never seen that system before. The father ignored them. His attention remained on the hidden wire. The wire everyone else had dismissed. Slowly, he reached toward it. Years of experience told him exactly what he was looking at. The inventor hadn't built a failed supercar. He had built a puzzle. A test. A machine designed to reveal itself only to someone willing to understand it. The father gently touched the wire. The moment his fingers made contact, the entire vehicle came alive. The showroom lights reflected across the carbon fiber body as digital systems awakened one after another. Screens illuminated. Sensors activated. Hidden displays emerged from the dashboard. The crowd stumbled backward in shock. A deep electronic hum filled the room. Then came the sound nobody thought they would ever hear. The engine started, not with an explosion of noise, not with violent revving, but with a smooth, powerful growl that sounded years ahead of anything on the market. The room froze. Several engineers simply stared. One investor nearly dropped his phone. A reporter lowered her microphone and whispered, "Impossible." The CEO looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. For 3 days, 20 elite engineers had failed. Yet this man had succeeded within minutes. The dashboard suddenly displayed a message. The crowd moved closer. The screen flashed a name. Not a company. Not a model number. A person's name. The inventor. The man everyone believed had disappeared forever. The father stared at it. His chest tightened. Because he knew that name. Not from books. Not from articles. Personally. The realization hit him harder than the engine's roar. The CEO turned toward him. "How did you know?" The father remained silent. The crowd waited. His daughter looked up at him. "Daddy." He knelt beside her and smiled. Then he stood and faced the room. "You all thought this machine was abandoned." The engine purred behind him. "You thought it failed." Nobody interrupted. "You thought its creator disappeared without finishing his work." The father glanced at the inventor's name glowing across the dashboard. Then he revealed the truth. He didn't disappear. The room leaned in. The CEO's eyes widened. The father took a slow breath. After everyone rejected him, he walked away from the industry. The silence became unbearable. And the reason I recognized the symbol. He looked once more at the name on the screen. Is because the man who built this car was my father. The entire showroom erupted into stunned disbelief. The crowd that had laughed at him minutes earlier could only stare. The CEO stood speechless. The engineers looked shattered. And beside the world's most valuable supercar, a little girl smiled proudly as everyone finally understood who her father really was.